Good afternoon, and welcome to the Advanced Practitioner Series. My name is Patrick Shepard. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Nicole Stein from OGE's Legal, External Affairs and Performance Branch. Welcome, Nicole.
Thanks.
Today, Nicole is going to be discussing our calendar year 14 Annual Agency Ethics Program Questionnaire. Some highlights from the results that hopefully you'll find to be very useful in your programs and figuring out how your resources compare to other similarly situated programs. Before I turn it over to Nicole, I'd like to cover some brief announcements. We'll be back next week with the rescheduled Misuse of Position Fundamentals Series webinar. So please do look for that. We'll be reopening registration on Monday, and then I believe the presentation is going to happen on Wednesday. Also next month, we will be joining you for our regularly scheduled broadcasts. So we do look forward to that. Well, welcome, Nicole. So today we're talking about the calendar year 14 Annual Agency Ethics Program Questionnaire.
Yes.
So could you give us a little bit of history of the questionnaire? What is the questionnaire for those folks who might not be familiar with it?
Sure. So the questionnaire is in response to a legal requirement that's in the Ethics in Government Act that requires each agency to submit a report to the Office of Government Ethics. It's about 60 questions. And actually, the slide there is sort of a nice summary of the questionnaire. It's due to OGE February 1st each year, and it covers the previous calendar year. And the slide shows the type of information that's collected. So the organization, the resources, some information about how each agency's ethics program is administering their program, education and training, advice and counsel. So it's a mix of quantitative data. So we're looking for compliance numbers, how many people were required to file the 278 versus how many actually filed the 278. And then there's some also information just asking generally about the practices of an agency for advice and counseling or how they're providing initial ethics orientation. So it not only gives OG information about the individual agency's program, but also it gives us the opportunity to look at the executive branch ethics program as a whole. And this really is the only data source that gives us that type of information.
So we get kind of a macro perspective of the executive branch ethics program that allows us to check on the health of the program overall, as well as an insight for oversight purposes into individual programs. Is that kind of what we're doing?
It is, exactly.
Excellent. So I understand this questionnaire has evolved over the years. Are there any significant changes that have come about in calendar year 14?
There are. See if the slide changes. Okay. So the questionnaire underwent a review in 2014. There was a cross-agency group that was comprised of myself, a program reviewer, a training specialist who is also the agency's ADAO. And we reviewed the questionnaire from 2013, and we really started from the beginning, looking at what is the purpose of the questionnaire, why are we collecting it, to make sure that we were all on the same page as an agency, as OG, as to why we were doing this. We reviewed the legislative history, and then we went question by question and looked at each one to say, how is OG planning to use this data? Do we have a purpose and intent? And then is the question open for interpretation?
Okay, so we want our questions to be as precise as possible so that people
Yes.
aren't interpreting them different ways. So one of the things you are trying to accomplish is to make the questions as unambiguous as possible.
Exactly. And so one step that we took is we held a focus group of ethics officials. And for the questions where we thought there might be some ambiguity, we asked them, how are you interpreting this question? And so for some of the questions, we found that everyone was on the same page. And for some others, there were different ways of how you could interpret the question, which would change the type of data that you were reporting. So in response to that, we added some examples to the questionnaire and added some clarifying language.
That makes sense, because we want to make sure that our data is as consistent as possible, but also that helps us with accuracy.
Exactly, and especially when you're compiling the data, you do want to make sure that you're comparing apples to apples. If you're just looking at the individual agency's response, it's not as big an issue, but when you're compiling the 137 agencies' responses, you do want to make sure, to the best of your ability, that the data, is saying the same thing. So a few of the changes that were made in response to this review is we provided some clarification for how to count financial disclosure reports. So we clarified that agencies should only include reports that were required to be filed or completed as of December 31st. So that really just covered that small window of financial disclosure filers and also those requiring initial ethics orientation that come on board at the end of December.
Okay.
We also modified the question about initial ethics orientation to change the focus to timeliness. So we previously were just asking how many of your employees were required to attend initial ethics orientation and how many of them actually attended. So we changed the question to how many received initial ethics orientation within the 90 days, how many outside 90 days, and how many still haven't received it.
I see.
So we moved towards a compliance-focused question.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense, I think.
We also changed how we were counting ethics officials, and I think this is something that we're continuing to look to see how we can best capture this. Ethics officials currently is not defined within 2638. So we changed the question to, previously it was those that worked exclusively or not exclusively on ethics, and then who were headquartered in DC, and then who worked in the region.
Okay.
So we changed the question to those that work within the DC area and those that work outside the DC area, and we're interested in that from a training perspective to know where our audience is located.
Yeah, I'm very interested in ensuring we have the right balance between distance learning opportunities for folks in the field and in-person opportunities for those in DC.
Right. And then instead of worked exclusively, non-exclusively, we sort of asked the agencies to drill down a little bit more. And so we asked, sort of giving a range, the hours worked on the ethics program so that we could try to calculate the full-time equivalency. And I'll show you some of the results from that change.
So you're looking for a greater resolution there. So we have a clearer picture of who's really supporting the executive branch program.
And how much time, to what degree. And then just two other changes that we made. We combined and added options for discussing common practices to advice and counseling, the collection of delinquent reports, and succession planning. And then within the application, we required justifications for any discrepancies between the number of required and the number filed. So you'll see we tend to follow up with agencies when we see that there is a discrepancy between compliance numbers. And so this gave the agencies an opportunity to provide a justification prior to it being sent to OGE. And then the last change we made was just how we collect the information. So previously we used Survey Gizmo, which we've used for several of our other surveys. Recently we've brought in-house 2 individuals that can develop applications. So one of our developers, Tim, developed an application for collecting the information. And one of the upsides is that he was able to add some data validation. So there was auto counting, auto summing. It required, like I said, the justification, and it made the on the back end, after the collection, it increased our ability to do some of this analysis, which I'll present to you in the next few slides.
Excellent. So it sounds like a good modernization and an emphasis on resolution and accuracy of the data.
Yes,
that's great.
And one that will continue each year to continue to try to clarify. So in case we have any non-government listeners, I just wanted to provide a quick reminder about the structure of the executive branch ethics program. So we use this triangle in our training often. So OG at the top, we set the policy for the entire executive branch ethics program, while the head of each agency has primary responsibility for the implementation of the ethics program at their agency. But to support the day-to-day activities of the ethics program, each agency head appoints individuals to serve as the agency's designated agency ethics official, the DAO. And then depending on the size of the agency, there may be additional professional ethics staff supporting the ethics program. So in the middle of the triangle, that represents the 4,500 full-time, part-time ethics officials that work in the executive branch to provide all executive branch employees, the 2.7 million employees at the base of the triangle, help in identifying and resolving conflicts of interest. So OG's role is really to support those ethics officials, and the ethics officials are then providing that day-to-day assistance to the employees. And this presentation is going to focus on the work done by each of the agencies to implement the executive branch ethics program. So this next slide is a map that I found on the website governing.com. And it pulls information from the Office of Personnel Management and the Bureau of Labor and Statistics about the current employment statistics of the federal employees. And it's showing the concentration of federal employees throughout the United States. And one thing that I thought was interesting, working and residing in DC, is that of the approximate 2.7 million, only 346,000 work in the DC metropolitan area. And I provide this as context to the next slide, which is going to show the number of ethics officials as reported and where they're located across the country. So this next slide is looking at how many employees, we're talking about federal employees, performed ethics program duties in calendar year 14. So as I already mentioned, we changed how we asked this question. So this is just looking at 14. We're not able really to compare it back. And one thing that we found is that there was a spike in the number of individuals that performed ethics program duties. So if you were to compare this slide to the slide from last year about the number of ethics officials, and it's mostly attributable to those that spend less than 1 hour per week. Our sense in speaking to agencies is that this is not necessarily due to an influx of new ethics officials, but rather individuals that had previously been performing minor ethics duties and so weren't included in prior data requests.
So that kind of makes sense. So before, when we were asking agencies about who was supporting their ethics program, they were telling us people who contribute significantly.
Right.
And when we provided them the category of less than an hour per week, they said, oh yeah, actually we do have some people who intermittently provide some kind of support to the program.
Support, right.
So they gave us those numbers as well, and that's responsible for maybe some of the difference between last year and this year.
Exactly. But we made a decision that when we're reporting out on ethics officials in our, let's say, our budget document or on our website, that we're going to use the number that spend 2 or more hours.
Okay.
So if you see reporting in our documents, you'll see we're going to say 4,500, about 4,500 ethics officials supporting the program. So the two things that stood out to me when I looked at this chart, the chart shows us that 70% of employees perform ethics duties outside the district, which I think nicely matches with the map that we just saw, that most of our employees are actually working outside the DC metropolitan area.
And that's good, because that kind of suggests that there's proportional support for employees in the regions when they have ethics questions, sort of similar to those who work and reside in the district in related areas.
Exactly. And then if you look at the ethics officials that are in the DC area, they're spending more of their time on ethics. So 26% of the ethics officials in DC spend more than 21 hours per week compared to only 6% in the region. So it seems to indicate that those in the region, that it's probably an ad hoc responsibility, but they are supporting the majority of the employees that are in the field.
I think that makes sense. You'd expect that the leadership and actual management and administration of the program would take place near the headquarters area, and those people who provide support as needed are distributed in the various duty stations.
Exactly. The one other piece, we asked if the programs use contractor support. So we found that 20% of the agencies responded yes, that they are using contractor support. And just a note, there's 137 agencies that responded, that are required to respond to the questionnaire. So the percentages are based on 137 agencies. So the next slide is a question that we get asked often. So I thought, okay, all right, let's get started. So to discuss the designated agency ethics official, which is the most senior ethics official in the government. So I think a few key takeaways from this slide is that the majority of the DAOs spend less than 25% of their time on ethics. The majority are career appointees. About a third of them are eligible to retire, and a third of them have served as DAO for more than 5 years. So that means we do have a lot of new DAOs working across the government, which is why we have a lot of these training sessions. And I think it makes sense that the majority of the DAOs spend less than 25% of the time. A lot of times they're the more senior, and that you do have, over 4,500 ethics officials that are supporting the program. So especially the larger programs have staff that are supporting
and I think
the
this
program.
This has always been a balance in agency ethics programs, because we want the designated agency ethics official to occupy a position in the agency where they're sufficiently senior to advocate for resources and participate at an executive level. But often that means that the DAO is someone like the general counsel or the deputy general counsel who's going to have responsibilities beyond the day-to-day administration of the program. So, I don't think that's disheartening that many of the DAOs don't spend
Right.
absolutely every minute of their day doing ethics.
Agreed. Okay. So we're always talking about succession planning, and while only a third are eligible for retirement of the senior ethics officials, we're always interested to know what agencies are doing to support the short-term and long-term continuity of the ethics program at their questionnaire. And one of the reasons that we, within the questionnaire, have several questions that are asking more about practices is it helps OG know if there's certain practices that we think should be more prevalent and we're seeing lower numbers, and that helps us know where we need to dedicate our resources and provide maybe some additional training or use the desk officers, or it reinforces that agencies are already mentoring or providing structured courses when we talk about advice and counsel, memorializing their advice, and so it just helps us know that, okay, this is already a common practice going on within the government.
And that's something we've actually been focusing on a lot in the training program here at OGE, is we recognize that there's always going to be turnover in our ethics program, that agencies are always going to be onboarding new ethics staff. And what we've tried to do over the last few years is to create a huge library of professional development courses, and this is going to be a presentation as part of that library. So if you have new employees, you're looking for professional development tools for them, we'd encourage you to make use of all of these distance learning broadcasts we've issued over the last 2 to 3 years. I think there are more than 50 of them now.
Oh, wow.
So it's what we do here at OGE when we have new employees. We assign them the basic courses, and then we talk to them after they take them. So, hopefully you find that to be a good tool.
And this slide is just showing sort of the more popular options that were selected. So attending structured courses, having a mentor, in more the programmatic area, having knowledge libraries, and having written standard operating procedures. Okay, so this is a slide that I thought was earlier, and this is the one I think could be of interest to some people. So what I took was, based on the ethics officials and the time spent, we figured out the number of full-time equivalent ethics officials per an agency, and then looking at the number of employees that were reported by each agency on the questionnaire, looked at the ratio of the number of employees per full-time equivalent ethics official. And then we broke this down by small agencies, mid-sized agencies, and large agencies.
So this is the big benchmark.
Yes.
When we're trying to decide how overworked we are as ethics officials.
Yes, just you can take a look at this. Now I will say, well, some of the other numbers I used, the 2.7 million, when you look at the overall number of federal employees reported in the questionnaire, it's much higher. It's in more the 3 million. I think one reason for that is the Postal Service, in the reports that are sent to OPM when they report out on the number of employees, the Postal Service is not included in that. And then if you look at our numbers, the Postal Service has a lot of federal employees. So this is the average for the number of, 1 ethics officials per employee. So I think this is one where, as an agency, you can look at your own ratio and compare that to the average just to see where you fall on the spectrum.
So this is quite a big spread. We see with the small agencies that you roughly have an ethics official for every 30 employees. And that kind of makes sense, because when we look at that bottom chunk of agencies, they tend to have, sometimes fewer than 100 employees. So, even if you just have 2 ethics officials, that ratio is pretty low.
Right.
And then the mid-sized agencies, likewise, we have a couple hundred employees per ethics official. But then with the larger agencies and departments, that number jumps up quite a lot. So, that's actually surprising.
Yeah, I think it depends on the large agencies, how they're set up. And some of them, I think, just the centralized. But
yeah, the centralized program. And there are also efficiencies that can be found in a large agency.
Right.
Right. In a small agency, you still need someone to keep the books and answer the questionnaire and do all the things that ethics programs have to do,
right,
as well as support the employees.
Please.
But you only have to do those things once per agency.
Per agency. But yeah, I think it's something for the large agencies to consider, because I'm not sure, as ethics officials, sometimes you have to put on that program management hat and to really look at the resources that you're provided and to see, is that sufficient? And I think sometimes using these, the data and being able to compare it to other programs. And I will say that now, for the first time, we've posted each agency's individual response. So while to the questionnaire on our website, and while that's of use of, making it more transparent and making the information available to the public, it's also of use to the agencies and to the ethics officials, because if you need to argue for more resources or you're finding that your ratio is much higher than another agency's, I think that is a better argument to take to your senior management to say, look at our program compared to other programs.
And I think the corollary to that is this indicates that some, particularly some of the larger agencies, are finding really good efficiencies, and that if you're successfully serving, 2,000 employees per ethics official,
right,
and you have good practices that help you to do that, we'd encourage you to share that information with your similarly situated colleagues, because this is a challenge that's not going away,
right.
And I don't think we're going to get geometric increases in the resources available to us.
True.
So,
I think that's a really good point. So another part of the questionnaire is we asked in the area of program administration, and we wanted to see how ethics officials are spending their time. So the questionnaire asked each agency to rank, excuse me, how much time they spend administering the topic areas that are listed on the screen, and then to break down their responses by using the time spent scale. So, and this is at the bottom, this does show just any time that I'm mentioning small or medium or mid-sized agencies and large, that this is the number, the breakdown that we use. So small is less than 300 employees, medium or mid-size is between 300 and 4,000 employees, and large is more than, and I'm missing a zero, so more than 4,000 employees. And that was the same breakdown that we used at the summit last year for small agency day, mid-size agency day, large agency day. So what you see on here is for each of the program areas, depending on the size of the agency, it's showing the average amount of time that's spent. I think the differences in response is most noticeable in the area of financial disclosure. So if you're looking at confidential financial disclosure program, the small agencies are spending a limited amount of time, the medium, very significant, the large, significant amount of time. And I've highlighted in red for each of the size where they're spending the most, or the percentage is the highest. And then for public financial disclosure, what's the same? So the small agencies are spending a limited amount of time, the medium, a very significant amount of time, and the large agencies are a significant amount of time.
Actually, this is interesting. This kind of helps us to make sense of some of those ratios before, because some of the requirements in our program are per employee requirements, and some of them are per agency requirements. So it's kind of as you'd expect. Our small agencies are spending a limited amount of time in the per employee categories, and we can presume they're spending the rest of that time in the per agency requirements.
So I'll now go into each of the program areas and some data. So since people are spending the most time on financial disclosure, we'll start with that and with a few factoids about the program. So compared to last year, agencies reported a 24% increase in periodic transaction reports. And I think the benefit of the PTRs is that it's real-time conflict analysis, and either people are trading more often this past year or they're complying with the requirements this year. A very small percentage, less than 1% of the reports that were filed, and this is for public financial disclosure, the 278 reports and the periodic transaction reports, were filed late and required a late filing fee. The Treasury did collect some money, but it really represents a very small percentage of our filers. And then sort of around the 2.7 million employees, about approximately 13% of those employees file a confidential financial disclosure report. And I always like to point out to people, for the agencies that are, when you're reporting on the annual questionnaire, to really take that opportunity for self-assessment and to look at, the current year questionnaire and compare that to the previous year. And it's an opportunity to look at your trends. So especially in the area of confidential financial disclosure, to look at the percentage of employees that are filing the reports and to look at it from the past few years to see, has there been a significant increase? Has there been a decrease? And then to look at why there's been an increase. I know a lot of agencies every few years are going and doing a full-scale review to see, are the right people filing the 450s? Do we have too many people filing? And so this can help be an indicator of whether or not it's time for a review of your the 450 filers.
I think that's a really good point from a programmatic perspective, because it does feel like a chore to review your confidential financial disclosure roles, but that is a number that has a tendency to creep up in organizations. You add and add and add and never subtract or review the responsibilities of your filers. And while it can be a one-time sort of pain for the resources of the program, you can save yourself a lot of time around the review season.
Okay, so I also took a look at the average, the number of filers, or really it's the number of reports per an ethics official. And once again, we're looking at the full-time equivalent. So if you're looking at the large, mid-sized, small, and then for all agencies, so it's not that surprising. The one thing which I think maybe in the future as we have time to do more analysis would be then to take this information and to do a comparison to the timeliness of the review. I will say I took a look at comparing this number with the compliance numbers, or the percentage of compliance with financial disclosure, to see if there was any clustering between the sort of the ratio of employee to financial disclosure, or employee to ethics official. There was some clustering where maybe those agencies that had slightly lower compliance percentage of those that were actually filed with having higher ratios. But I think probably the more important one to be to see if there's any relationship between the timeliness of the review versus the number of resources that are dedicated to reviewing the reports.
Well, this is kind of interesting, because while there's a big difference between the large agencies and mid and small agencies with respect to confidential filers, it's significantly less than the difference we saw in the employee per ethics official ratio. So that might also be indicative of some of the differences in those two categories, because it looks like large agencies have twice as many filers per agency ethics official, and that's a lot, but that's not 10 times as many.
Right.
So that's very interesting.
I mean, and the other thing to point out, when we ask about the ethics officials in the questionnaire, we're not asking them specifically to break down by the duties that they're assigned to.
Right.
So we also, know that we can't make the assumption that every single ethics official is reviewing a 278. So the way the slide is set up is actually making that assumption. So the numbers also, if you probably would be slightly skewed if you were to look at the number that are in the agency that are actually participating in the review or any type of the administration of the financial disclosure program.
That makes sense. And I know at some large agencies, the workforce scales to meet the demands of filing season. So you may have some people who are drawn into the program very temporarily for maybe even just a few days to help process through those reports, and then they don't provide ethics services for the rest of the year.
Okay, so moving into training. So we have initial ethics orientation and annual ethics training. One fact or data point from the compilation that we found is that 98% of the employees that were required to receive initial ethics orientation received that training within the 90-day period. So we were, from a compliance perspective, very pleased to see that.
That's really good program-wide.
To see. Patrick, was there anything that you wanted to say about what OG is doing in the area of initial ethics orientation?
We are working on providing some tools for agencies to use to more easily and effectively deliver their initial ethics orientation. So through the rest of this calendar year, you can expect to see some publications, some written publications that you can use as part of your IEO. Also some sample slide decks and scenarios that you can use to enhance the in-person training you're giving. And we might also get around to a virtual product or a video-like product that you can use to help satisfy that requirement. So we're looking for ways to support you. We may be reaching out to some of you to get your feedback and input about what kinds of things you're looking for, and hope to have some publications to you in the next few months.
That's great. And I think, one thing we found, we asked who develops the training for the initial ethics orientation, and most agencies responded that they're developing their own training. So it sounds like that might help with reducing duplication of effort.
Yeah, I think, we're trying to sort of strike a balance between reducing duplication of effort, but also giving agencies the flexibility to meet the needs and specific challenges posed by their workforce.
So for annual ethics training, agencies reported that the two most common methods of delivery were in-person classes and self-paced videos. We also found that about 2/3 of the agencies provided additional training, and not that surprising, the two groups that were mentioned most often are procurement officials and supervisors.
And that's really good, because we're also working on some products that agencies can use in the area of annual ethics training. And we're focusing on 4 audiences initially, and supervisors and contractors are the first 2 that we're going to be discussing. So our goal is to produce a library of scenarios that you can put to work for specialized training for groups of employees that have particular ethics challenges or dilemmas.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's see. The next area where a lot of time is spent is in advice and counseling. So we asked agencies to rate how frequently the agency provided opinions, advice, and counseling on the following topics: gift acceptance, which excluding awards and travel. I think we have travel on there, public financial disclosure, confidential financial disclosure. But since 2006, the topic asked most frequently is gifts, and that's not that surprising. I think that's an area where, the employee wants to make sure that they are taking the right action, and there's always with the exceptions, I think, can be a little confusing.
And I also think this is an area where any employee can be faced with a gift scenario.
Yes.
With some of the like the outside activities, not all of our employee categories are equally exposed to the opportunity to engage in outside employment, especially that's related to their official duties. So this is an area I think it has the broadest applicability. It applies to all of our workforce, and all of our employees face these challenges every day.
It was interesting. There was a slight difference when you looked at it from the small, mid-size, large. The mid-size agencies selected financial disclosure. I think one thing to note, and this came up during the focus groups that we held last year, is that not every agency has a formal tracking system for tracking each piece of each piece of advice that they're given. So a lot of this data is based on perception, the sense of the amount of questions on a particular topic. So something just to keep in mind. Another question, this is an area where we wanted to know some of the common practices around advice and counseling. So 22 agencies said that they conduct customer service surveys. 59 do periodic supervisory review of the advice given. 120 have discussions amongst staff. 118 memorialize advice. The majority of those only memorializing some of the advice and counsel. 60 of you use advice and counsel templates. 66 are using a database to track the timeliness or for research. And this is a very similar practice to OG. We have our desk officers that are constantly consulting with one another. We have issue forums where they can come and discuss the issues that they're receiving from the agencies, to discuss difficult questions and their resolution. We have our own tracking database that we can use for conducting research. So I think these are a lot of the common practices.
No, and I think the emphasis here is that communication is necessary to ensure consistency and high quality advice and counseling. And it looks like agencies are employing a lot of different tools to ensure that.
Exactly. Let's see. So one of the most important part of our jobs as ethics officials is to advise employees how to resolve potential conflicts of interest as they occur. So as far as remedies, we know that, recusal is one option where the person just doesn't work on the particular government matter. They can also divest. They might resign if it's a conflict related to an outside position. And I think this type of information or data that's reported to us about the types of resolutions really demonstrates the success of the program as a prevention program.
Right, because after all, this is what it's about.
Right.
We're trying to prevent conflicts of interest, and the mechanism that we use to do that is important. It looks like recusals, which is kind of what you'd expect.
And this is really what's on the slide. Is the question that we're asking is, based on a conflict that's identified on an annual OG Form 278, what the corrective action was taken. So this is really showing, prevention and action. The purpose of the Form 270, or one purpose of the OG Form 278, and now it's the 278E, is to identify potential conflicts of interest so that they can be resolved. So this is just showing that recusal is the most common option. Let's see. So while the focus of the program is prevention, we do know that violations occur. And the next 2 graphs I'm going to show the number of disciplinary actions taken based upon violations of the criminal conflict of interest statutes and the standards of conduct. And so for purposes of the question, disciplinary action can include removal, demotion, suspensions, written reprimands, or their equivalents. It is difficult to draw conclusions from either of the graphs without more in-depth analysis, and it really would be analysis done outside of this office, since we sort of the area of enforcement is outside of our scope. But a drop in the numbers could be a result of more training, or a spike could be the result of increased resources devoted. But I think it's still of interest just to show the numbers to the community. So this is disciplinary actions based on violations of the conflict of interest statutes. And we can see that there continues to be in here a dip in the numbers. It's important to remember that the criminal conflict of interest statutes, that disciplinary action can be in addition or in lieu of criminal action. So if DOJ can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, then the availability of a disciplinary action might influence the decision. The next slide is looking at the provisions in 2635. In this one too, we continue to see a decline. Something that I learned at the summit last year, there was a session where two employee relations professionals were giving a presentation, and they mentioned that when charging an employee, that one of the generic charges can be conduct unbecoming, and then within that charge, they might describe the ethics violation in the narrative. So that would mean that that individual would not be counted towards these numbers, even though...
So this could be a trend not in actual violations or even violations that result in disciplinary action,
right?
But that it could be a change in the technical way in which the charge is drafted.
Exactly.
That's fascinating, actually.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. So we still just wanted to share the data points with you. So those are really some of the highlights that we found that I thought might be of interest to the ethics community. I just wanted to let you know what OG does with the information. And this was sort of, we mentioned at the start of the presentation, but one purpose of the questionnaire is for knowledge. It's knowledge of the individual agency's ethics program, and it's collective knowledge of the entire, as Patrick mentioned, the macro level of the executive branch ethics program. Part of it is oversight. It is partially an oversight function. We're able to monitor compliance, and really we're just looking for red flags. If over multiple years an agency we're seeing that their compliance rates are fairly low, then that's something that might get reported to our program review division. We also use it as a reporting mechanism. It's the one place, as I said, where we're able to collect information about the whole program. So in publications, our budget document, on our website, in various presentations, when OG goes and speaks about the program, and we're saying how many ethics officials there are in the program, or how many financial disclosure reports or how many filers there are, we're getting those numbers from the annual questionnaire. And that's why it's really important for the agencies, to the best of their ability, to look at the quality of the data that they're reporting, to make sure that they're validating their information, because this information is being used by OG, and now that we're making it more publicly available, by other agencies and by the public and potentially the media to report on the program. So as been mentioned throughout the year, for the first time this year, we've reported or published individual agency responses. And Patrick, if you want to go to the website, I'll just show everyone where you can find more information. So if you go to OG's website, and under the program management tab, it's a little bit hidden, within the special reports, there's 3 reports that were published. So there's a sort of summary of the key results, which is the compilation. So it's a 60-page document, but it's the summary number for each question plus all of the comments that were submitted. Then there's a very high level, the PowerPoint presentation that distills the information. It has some of the same graphs as the one that was just presented to you today, but it's meant to be very public friendly, to sort of show the makeup of the executive branch ethics program. And then the third link, the questionnaire responses, that will take you to a link where then you can view each agency's response to the questionnaire. So So once again, hopefully you've found this helpful, and I always encourage the agencies really to use the questionnaire as an opportunity for self-assessment for your own program, to look at the information that you're reporting and look to see if there's where the strengths and weaknesses are for your program, where you might need to make improvements, and to take a check into your program as far as, especially a lot of in the area of compliance, to see if there's any room for improvement.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Nicole.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think that's extremely helpful information. Do we have some time for questions?
Yes, we do.
Excellent. So we'd like to remind you, as always, if you have a question and you're on the Hangout, you can use the question app in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And if the operator could please open up the phones for any questions we might have.
All right, thank you. And at this time, we're ready to begin a question and answer session. If you have a question, please press the *1 and please record your name. To withdraw your question, press *2. Once again, press *1 if you have a question. One moment.
Give folks on the Hangout some time to type in any questions they might have.
All right.
But I always find this to be a really useful exercise to take a look at the composition of the executive branch ethics program, to sort of find out where we're going, what kind of differences we're seeing year to year. Yeah. And when I worked in an agency, I found this information to be really helpful to kind of see how we were doing, to be able to dig into the data.
Well, you benchmark yourself against
we're trying to figure out how many resources we require to accomplish a certain mission. So sort of see how others are doing can be really helpful. Yeah. And also to see who's doing really well with the resources they have.
Yeah.
Because
then you can go contact them and find out how they're doing
How are you doing it?
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm not showing any questions on the app.
All right.
And there are no questions on the phone.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Nicole, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is really helpful, and I hope everyone will take a moment to look into the primary sources, look into the documents, and see if there is data in there that will be useful to you in the administration of your programs. And we hope you'll join us next year for the calendar year 15 questionnaire. Yes. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week for the Fundamental series and for future broadcasts. So thank you very much.